Hello, everyone. I am Andrea Keefe, the Meetings and Events Coordinator with IPC. I'm very excited to kick off today's webinar on successful PCB partnerships. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please send them using the chat or Q&A feature on your control panel. At the end of today's webinar, we will go through the questions and answers at that time. We will also be providing everyone with the speaker's direct email address, a recording of today's webinar, and a link to download the Better Board Buying ebook. This email will be sent in approximately 1 to 2 business days. Today, I am pleased to welcome Greg Papandrew with Better Board Buying to be our featured speaker. I'll now turn it over to you, Greg.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, IPC, for allowing me to share some wisdom on this Wisdom Wednesday. Yes, successful PCB partnerships. This is not so much a webinar or instruction on, making sure about quality or engineering, but it's one often overlooked subject, which has to do with how to be a better buyer. With this, as Andrea mentioned, you'll get a free ebook. You can actually go to Amazon if you want to get a hard copy of it, but it's a great book. It just shows how what is the process of making a circuit board, and what you just need to know the basics. So when you are talking with an engineer about a board, or you're talking with a customer about a board, or you're talking with your supplier about a board, well, when they start talking to you, you'll know what they're saying. And it talks about technologies, and also it will go into industry terms, a glossary. So it's a great reference from anyone from reception to receiving to have this in their hand. And it's not a very thick book. So one weekend, a good read, and it'll make you an expert, or dangerous, depending on how you want to look at it. Well, let's get into the meat of it, since we're only here about 30 minutes. Again, this is not as in-depth as we can go into it. And if you want to, as Andrew said, you can contact me later. But this is to give you a good overview and a little bit of an issue that is hitting us today called tariffs, and we'll get into that a little bit later. What's really interesting about me, my career, I've been in the industry for over 25 years. I've been a salesman, broker, consultant, but I've sold over $250 million in PCBs over the last 25 years. And what makes me a little bit different, in order for me to sell that many, I had to buy that many. And 20 years ago, the buyers back then were different. When I was cutting my teeth on the industry, I was given a book, similar to the book that you can get right now for me. Actually, is the 7th edition of that book. But that's how I had to learn about the industry. And then as I was talking to buyers, well, they knew what a board was. And a little bit different too back then, because things were not as electronic, was commodity. We had D-size prints. It was commodity buying. You had a buyer who bought boards or fabs, and they also were responsible for the metal. Anything three-dimensional they bought. So these buyers knew what they were buying, because that's the only thing they were supposed to be buying. And when they had these D-size prints, you would actually see what you were buying. And what I mean by that is, today, just have these electronic data. Here, quote this board. Before we had physical prints, we had to go pick up physical artwork. When I spoke with a customer and went to see to get the quote, he said, Greg, here's a board I want to look at. And a D-size print was like a blueprint. It was as big as a tablecloth on your table there. And you actually discuss the board. Oh, this is a 4-layer board. You want this, you want that. The array is this or that size. And actually discuss the board. And the buyer knew what he was getting, and you knew what you were trying to sell. Well, today it's not like that. And it's all program managers and buyers and lean manufacturing, and you're buying everything as program managers and buyers today. And what I found out in the last 2 to 3 years is that most people today who are buyers have not received any kind of formal training at all, just mostly on-the-job training. And that's bad, because there's a lot of money to be left on the table, or you could be buying better for your company and more safely for your company. So should buyers be PCB trained? PCB, while it, quote, is a commodity, as they're trying to say, it is a unique to every customer or application. Again, they say it's commodity, but really it's not, because when I build a circuit board for someone, I can't sell that circuit board to somebody else. It's only for that one specific use. It can't be changed to something else, like a bottle of water. I can sell a bottle of water to any customer, okay, or anyone, from a fair to a park to whatever, but I can't sell a circuit board to anybody. So PCBs also come from anywhere around the world. Buying PCBs can be challenging, but you can be trained. And as I mentioned before, a lot of today's buyers are leaving a lot of money on the table. I'm walking in there and I'm almost smiling, I can do this better for you. Oh, really? I did not know that. Well, how long have you been in the job? 6 months. How did you start the job? Well, I've been doing it here for 5 years and I just inherited the job and I'm just ordering from my past vendors. It's something that you're leaving on the table. And I think whether you're a buyer, program manager, engineer, or even owner of a company that buys circuit boards, you're putting yourself in a precarious position. OEM, EMS, they train for anything else, for everything else, whether it's how a board's inspected, how you're supposed to look at a board, how it's supposed to solder, how you're supposed to store it. But something that is 8 to 12% of the bill of materials, there is no formal training on how to do that. The thing that is the foundation of your product, and no one's trained on how to buy it, that's where this came up. That's where Better Board Mind started, was I noticed there was a need. So we'll start with the basics. So tools for a successful PCB partnership. Love may be blind, but buying printed circuit boards doesn't have to be. Now, I use that and a lot of stuff when I talk to people. I always use analogies to help explain things and put things in perspective. But again, it's more than just buying a board or throwing something over the fence and see what happens. So when you want to decide where to buy PCBs, there's a couple things. There's really three things you look at is time, technology, and speed, is which vendor you're going to choose. But which vendor to use or to have in your quiver is the board military ITAR. If it's military ITAR, it's got to stay here. Yes, you can go offshore for ITAR boards. There's no doubt about that. You can go to Taiwan. You can deal with India on these things in some cases. But, there's a lot of great domestic manufacturers you should use on that and keep that stuff here. Look, I'm a proponent of business. So the businessman in me says, get what you ever can get anywhere at the best price possible. But the Boy Scout in me says, it's military ITAR, it needs to stay here. So there's plenty to do that. Does the board have high reliability requirements? Well, if it does, you may have to check on it. Is it 6012 class 3? Does it have the things that you need? Does the vendor, whether offshore or onshore, you can get that offshore, but do they have the understanding of what is needed and the paperwork to fill out? And will that paperwork be in English? So you have to look at that. Is there a reliability concern where, hey, I put this out in the field, okay, and it fails. Okay, yeah, you might be getting a great price on an offshore vendor, but if that board fails, how do you go after the vendor to recoup costs? Okay, if it's a US company, your chances are better. So you're looking at not only from a quality standpoint, from also a liability standpoint for your company. So you got to look at that. Yeah, I get a board cheap over there, but if something happens in the field, how do we solve the problem? How many pieces, volume? Well, that's a very good determinant factor. If it's prototype, several pieces in a few days, still go domestic. Usually 2 to 3 days, you can get that here domestically. Yes, offshore is playing on that, but they're not that good. It's not as consistent. If you really do a lot of them, I would suggest you stay here on that. If it's more 5 days or more, yes, offshore is playing in that field as well. Low to medium volume, still it's up or down. You can go both domestic or offshore. Offshore is playing very well in that field. But again, it depends upon your requirements, it depends upon reliability, and it depends upon the amount of paperwork that you want. Okay, so what is your industry? Military, medical, high rel, you may want to stay domestic on that for the quick turn, low medium volume. Otherwise, you can't go offshore. And there's something that's high volume, commercial only, definite schedule, ups and downs, pulled in, pulled out. We have safety stock. Definitely go offshore for that stuff. Okay, if you're still doing domestically, think about something else on that one because it just does not make sense. Spread out your requirements. Play the field. Again, I'm using the relationship metaphor here. Yes, you can be a polygamist. You can be dating, okay? And you can look at other vendors without a problem because one manufacturer cannot service all your PCB needs. Seriously, your customers have more than one vendor. Why shouldn't you have more than one vendor? Not all PCB houses are created equal. And don't push the supplier's technology envelope. That's a big thing. I understand relationships, and I really do appreciate that when I had customers relationship, but when a customer relies on, when you as a customer rely on one vendor too much or push them to do something they're not comfortable with, it's going to set up for failure, and that just ruins everything. As again, it's okay to use another vendor and give the orders that make sense. That's the thing. Give the orders that make sense. I can't tell you how many times I'll go into a customer and they'll say, well, we're dealing with 25 vendors. Okay, well, some of it is customer edict that you must use this. And some things it's just, well, they do this, they do that. And the problem with that is spreading out too much is you lose your leverage and power, your buying power. You want to consolidate. And at the same token, I hate it when I go into, I shouldn't say hate it, but I also question why when I say to a customer, and they'll say to me, hey, I'll introduce them what might be selling. And they'll say to me, Greg, we have plenty of vendors. Well, to me, that's like, well, you're not interested in at least seeing what's out there? And I'll get into more of that later. So you see a vendor, one of the first things to do with a new vendor, and I really, before you go through all this, is see how they quote, but we'll get to that in a second. I'm sorry, jumping ahead here. Check the supplier's financial fitness. Make sure they're financially sound. Especially on domestic, it's very easy to do that. Pull a credit history, talk to the vendor's bank, or better yet, talk to the vendor's vendors. Board houses, like a lot of companies, they have to buy a lot of materials. They have the people they got to pay for. So sometimes their D&B may not be as great. They might be a slow pair, but they do pay their vendors. And that's the most important thing. And if there's really not a good credit history or poor finances, that might mean that they're not going to be able to build in a timely manner. Also, if you could talk to the bank. If you talk to their banker, sometimes that'll give you a little more insight. Yeah, Bill over at XYZ PCB, great guy. He's been in business for 25 years. He does pay everything. He's very healthy financially in the company, even though it may not look as great as you think it is, but talk to the banker. And you say, well, Greg, I deal with overseas vendors. What do I do with overseas vendors? Well, the thing about overseas vendors is that, it's hard to look at them. So in that case, double up on reference and reference checks. And speaking of that, follow up on references is a vital step in the vetting process. Many buyers don't ask, for references, and many of them don't actually follow up on them. And if you ask a vendor for references and they don't have it immediately, say something, because that does say something big time. And get at least 5 active customers. And when you get the 5 active customers, there's sometimes a form you can fill out and all that, but I would ask questions. Just give them a call and say, how long have you been dealing with this company? Okay. Oh, they're doing it. Oh, XYZ PCB is great. How long have you been dealing with it? 6 months? Okay, that's not long enough. How much do they buy a year? They're doing a great job. We only buy $10,000 a year. Well, is that comparable to what you're going to be buying a year? What percentage of the vendor's business is the references? In other words, are they a big player in this customer? Okay. And what percentage, likewise, how much percentage of the vendors is the supplier or vice versa? So you can say what kind of relationship, how do they depend on each other? Another thing is technology. You get a great, XYZ does a great job. Oh yeah, really, what kind of technology? 2-layer boards. Okay, I build 10-layer HDI and up. Okay, so you got to ask that. So even though it's a great guy and they're financially good, if they're not building your product, then there's a problem. Another very important thing is, how do they handle problems? I actually want to hope when I'm doing a vendor survey, they've had problems, because all the times you hear, oh, they're great, never had a problem. And the problem with that is, there will be problems. It's not if, but when a problem will happen. And then you're wondering, well, are they a fair-weathered friend? Or they're going to stand with me when there's a problem? In fact, real quick, a couple years back, I gave a customer 5 references. And he calls him back, and I follow up on the sale, and he says, Greg, yeah, we're going to deal with you. I said, good. References checked out? Yeah. But it was really interesting about the last one. And the last one, he mentioned about there was a quality concern, and I forgot about that. But he says, yeah, it really caused the guy a lot of problems. But what he liked, Greg, is how you and your company handled the situation, that it was brought to light, you handled it quickly. And he says, that's what I like to hear. So it's okay if someone has problems. We all have problems, you know. How do we handle them? And it's important to know that. Communicate early and often. You know, it's like with any relationship, you got to be talking. And PCB buyers don't communicate enough with vendors, and vendors should be communicating more. Likewise, I mean, it is a two-way street. Relationship takes two to tango. And you should be comfortable. It should not be adversarial. And basically, suppliers prefer to work with those they like, and suppliers will work harder for their friends. So I'm not saying you're supposed to be nice to them, and you're not supposed to treat them with kid gloves. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with being tough. There's nothing wrong with being tough and fair. And let them know when things are going good and not so good. Invest in a relationship makes good for a stronger supply chain, because when you let them know when things are good and not so good, start, stop, continue type thing. Feedback is a gift. If you let them know where they're standing, keep doing the good things, do the bad things, but talk. Because one of the things is, you know, I've had customers, reps complaining, oh yeah, this guy's a screamer. I go, I like dealing with vendors who are screamers. And I'm not knocking anybody on this, don't get me wrong. It's just that what happens is they get it off their chest what the problem is. Where you get the passive one, okay, one who doesn't say anything, well, you don't know what's going on. Don't be the passive one. If you want to have that service, go out there, let them know what's going on. Develop a problem resolution program. This is interesting. You know, we, every time we start a relationship or you talk to a vendor, it's not usually brought up. Okay, everything's great. We see your specs, we see your awards, your accolades, all those great testimonials and references. But what do we do with the problem? Do we have a documented plan? And it's never too late. So even with your present vendors, do you have a documented plan of what goes on? Again, it's not if, but when a problem will happen. And we'll resolve quality problems, issues faster and easier if you have it. And it can be a very simple document. Okay, we have this. We have a problem with this board. You have to be able to give them that information. Look, I have a problem with this board. I have this date code, this many pieces, this is the problem. This is what I need to keep my line up. Okay, by giving that information to the vendor, okay, the vendor should be ready to know how to reply and how to respond in a timely manner within whatever you might set up 24 hours to get a remake going or whatever maybe, or rework on this. But you should have, look, if something happens, what are you going to do? If I give you this information, what do you need for me to get this done as soon as possible? Okay, because that's going back to the Boy Scout reference, just being prepared. Be wary of self-inflicted costs. This is more of an internal thing that you as a buyer, program manager, engineer need to be talking to your people on the floor, your own company. Always be asking, when you get a quote, do we need the PCBs? We need this in 3 to 5 days. Well, do we really? I noticed that we can't get components in. I noticed that production is not going to get these boards right away. Ask these questions because, you know, the quicker you need the board, the more expensive it's going to be. It has nothing to do with quality or anything about, it just means time, because a quick turn, you're not paying for the fiberglass board, the solder mask, or the quality board. You're paying for that time, okay? Meanwhile, you have a constant runner. Do you need to order it monthly? Why not quarterly? Ask production, ask management. Hey, why are we doing this every month? Can we not have this 3 months? Can I not do consigned inventory here at the warehouse? Can I not keep my freight costs down? You know, are we going to change this rev so much? See, you know, there's ways of when you say order quarterly or even with an annual PO, it doesn't necessarily mean you're putting your company out there for a risk or a long-term commitment, because in your PO, you can say, we'll keep 3 months on the shelf, we're responsible for 3 months at this, whatever you could dictate in your PO. And I go more in detail this later, but you can dictate things like this in your PO to actually safeguard your company, but also keep costs down. Also, why so high-tech by design? You know, a Ford will get you there just as well as a Porsche. A lot of designers there, they design the most high-tech stuff. I'll look at board and say, oh, we have a lot of real estate. Why are we so tight on the lines here? I mean, there might be an actual engineering design need for something like that. But ask the questions, why are we doing this way? Okay. Even as simple as the array. Why do we have on the array or panelization? Why are the railings so large? Okay. Why are they a half inch to an inch and a half? I've seen that a lot of time. With all these mouse bites, can we not score and make the railing smaller? Because you're paying for real estate. So ask these questions. And is IPC 6012 class 2 really needed? And the reason why I say that is this. A lot of buyers, program managers, again, I'm not knocking because you're so busy, you're buying everything. You're not just a commodity, like I said before, where this is the only two subjects I deal with and buy, is that 6012 class 2 means a mound of paperwork, cross-section, and testing certification. Okay. If you have that on your print, okay, it begs the question from the vendor, or the vendor is going to charge you more. And you're like, why is this board so high and the other ones are so less expensive? Well, you might have a vendor who's on the ball, says, your print says 6012 class 2. It means X, Y, and Z. Do you not want this? If so, remove that line. Okay, so when you see that from engineering, is this true? One's a test and specification, 600 is a workmanship. So questions like these will save your company money. And I think a lot of buyers out there, program without that training, who have seen the print or know what that board looks like, fail to ask or don't know to ask these questions prior to that thing being sent out, that quote being sent out. Quote for fun. Make sure that each PCB supplier out there understands that you'll be dating other vendors. Need to trust but verify. Again, I'm not knocking you guys out there and buyers and program. I see it. Okay. You're a heck of a lot busier than you were 20 years ago. Okay. The buyers today, program, a heck of a lot busier with all technology that's supposed to make things easier in our lives, actually has made things tougher, and you don't have the time. But sometimes when you place an order, it's there, it's gone, great. But you need to be benchmarking. You need to be looking, okay? And you got to let your vendors know you be looking, because they will take advantage of you, because double-edged sword, we've got such a great relationship with you. We are best friends. At the same time, best friends should not be taking advantage of you in pricing. And you need to look at that. So, I'm not saying you get rid of someone, you're getting somebody happy for $1 and it's 97 cents. You don't move a job for 3, 5, or 8 cents, but you may want to leave it for 20 or 30 cents. Okay. Having them compete for your business keeps price under control, and they know that. It's okay. It's okay to be tough on your vendors. Okay. Just as your customers are tough on you. Tough but fair. Another thing real quick, quote for fun. I've been on a lot of floors of production facilities, EMS, OEMs, and I'll see boards and where they're made. There's some things that while walking your floor, if there's not PPAP'd in or you're able to change, I bet you can save money on boards that's on the floor and others found money. But again, you may not have the time to look at that. Just like there's continuous improvement, there's sometimes not continuous buying improvement. So take a look at those boards on the floor. I think you'd add a couple of points to your bottom line. Conduct regular surveys. One thing is today, and it's hard to do, and I'm trying to solve this to make it a little bit easier as far as training, but a lot of buyers and program managers have never sat in a board house, never seen an actual factory and how it's made. But one of the things especially as domestic, physically inspect your PCB suppliers. The surveys improve accountability, communication, expectations. And it all goes down to review technology capabilities. Do they have new capabilities? Is there new equipment? Is equipment the same equipment they had 5 years ago? Physically inspect, is the curb appeal the places? How well does it look? I'm not saying it has to look like a hospital, but is it neat and tidy? Okay, is it a place where everything is placed and well swept? I don't care if the walls need to be painted, but I do care if there's, dirt on the floor in the corner that could have been swept up 2 years ago. That's important, because while you're doing that, you're gauging the longevity of the supplier. And that's good, because then they'll be around and be there for your product, whether it's high rel or just the guy down the street. Like anything, trust but verify, seeing is believing. Pay promptly. Can't say this enough. Pay your PCB vendor on time. That ensures the financial stability and uninterrupted service. I know, hey, you got to negotiate what you can. But when you're not paying, you're no longer a customer. And there's a lot of customers out there who There are more customers out there who pay more on time than those who don't. So just as you need to have a reliable supplier, they need to have a reliable customer. It's very important. Okay, so here's a little tidbit I want to throw in, because we're coming up near the end here. Most of the questions I've been getting asked lately is these tariffs. How are we handling tariffs? Okay, made in China. Well, some people are not handling correctly. Some of your vendors, whether it be domestic manufacturing goes offshore for getting boards, or a broker who deals directly with offshore, they're not handling correctly. And if you got a letter that looks something like this should raise flags. PCB quotes will now, item 1, PCB quotes will now show a line for a tariff expense of 25% of the PO value. So that means if you're buying a board for $1, okay, that broker, buying it from a broker or that domestic house that is getting it from offshore, he's saying it's going to be $1.25. That is wrong, okay? The tariff is only due on the cost of the PCB at the time of export. So say that broker or vendor was buying that board for 80 cents offshore. The tariff is only applied to the 80 cents, and that should be applied to anything else, including inspection, freight, or profit. Now, granted, the vendor, your broker, the guy that supports you, the guy that you have a relationship, the guy that's always there for you, okay, is fine. Okay, they got to make that. I understand that. It's all part of business. But they should not be charging you the 25% on top of that amount. Okay, they should charge a portion of that. So on 80 cents, it's 20 cents, is 25% is 20 cents, so it should be $1.20 all well and good. Now, a lot of brokers and domestic manufacturers don't want to share what they're paying because it might give away what they're actually paying for the board. Here's a rule of thumb. The closer to 25% the percentage is that they're charging you above the price that they're selling it to you, the more reliable that is. The lower the percentage, either two things. They're cheating on the tariff or they're charging a hell of a lot of money. So in other words, if they're buying a board for 50 cents and they're only charging you 12.5 cents on top of that $1, it's all due for $1, well, they're making, 100% markup on that board. Good, that's fine, that's their business. Or they might be doing something else, which I'll show you here. And this is what you have to be careful as someone who's buying from a broker or a domestic board house that is going offshore. They actually misrepresent the actual cost. So there's a couple of things. One, they might, for that board that was 80 cents, they might be charging 40, they might be buying the board for 40 cents a piece and then charge a non-recurring engineering of 40 cents as well. So what was non-recurring now is a recurring engineering cost. When they're fudging the numbers, this is customer fraud. And the thing about that, your supply chain could be disrupted. And worse, you could be on the hook for tariff violations. The government, I wrote a column on this last month, the government can go after you downstream, especially, and this is the thing, you have to be careful how to instruct your vendor on how to handle tariffs. You need to ask them. And, I understand, I'm not saying avoid or anything like that, but I had one customer tell me, hey, Greg, my other customers are just charging $5,000 on every order as an engineering fee. Well, if you say that to a vendor, a broker, domestic manufacturer, and the Customs Border Patrol come and knock on that guy's door, he said, why are you doing this? Well, my customer told me this, and if I didn't do this, I would lose my business. Government could come right down to you on that, and that's bad. So have an honest discussion with your broker, and I would say put in place a hold harmless agreement, releasing you from any possible legal claims. And you really should have one in general, okay, for anything. But the tariffs, that's really something, and who knows how long that will go on. 6 weeks, 6 months, I don't know how long, but you should have that in place, and you should only be paying for what you need. Another misconception, we don't pay any tariffs. We get our PCBs from Taiwan. Don't get hooked on the sales statement, okay? Imposed tariffs do not necessarily mean a higher cost in the scheme of things. Please review all your costs before making your buying decision, like capacity and technology. Quite honestly, even with a 25% tariff, a circuit board from China is less than cost of a circuit board from Taiwan. and you'll get it faster. Okay, Taiwan has gotten busy because people, oh, no tariffs, they all scramble to Taiwan. And guess what? Taiwan's lead time's gone out. And because lead time's gone out, costs go up. Okay, so look at the total cost of ownership. Even if there's a tariff, look at that. And here, another way to be a little bit more sophisticated: bypass the broker. Okay, offset the tariff cost. You know, it's becoming more of a worldly world here, where you don't need an intermediary, because most brokers mark up PCBs at least 20 to 40%. The tariff is 25% of the PCB order at the time of export. The tariff is law, while the broker markup is optional if you want to use it. So going direct is not as hard as you think, but just think about it. Okay, so you can be spending the same amount of money, and then when the tariffs eventually go away or maybe reduced, hey, you save money on that. So you want to be a better buyer? Attend trade shows and industry events. Walk it. If you can't go to a board house, go to a trade show. Okay. So subscribe to industry publications and download free ebooks like PCB Basics for Buyers. Okay. You go anywhere, you find these ebooks. IPC has a bookstore. Go there. Increase professional development. IPC courses as well. Network among your peers. Get on LinkedIn. Be a member of IPC. Be a member of this group or the Electronics Assembly. Learn. See what people are doing. The more you see what's going on, you will just through osmosis become more experienced in the industry and a better buyer. Visit your present vendors. Visit prospective vendors and quote for fun. It is reality check, because that's what we're here for. When it comes to quality, when all things being equal, quality and delivery, you're looking at price. But first, quality and delivery has to be equal. Then you move on price. But until you do that, oh, my quality delivery is great, but I'm not looking at pricing. That's where it fails. So, who has the first question?
Thanks, Greg. So it does look like we have a couple questions. The first one, how should we go about checking their bank in a legal matter?
Oh, well, checking their bank in a legal matter as if they are, okay, a couple of things. One, you say, look, I would like to go ahead and can I talk to your bank officer? I'll leave the name of the bank and the address, and may have the bank officer's name and number. As far as a legal faction, depending where you are, I mean, I'm really not sure about a legal fashion as far as finding out their history, but you can pull a lot of information from records. And I would consult an attorney on that, because I don't want to get too much involved with any kind of legal or prying too much into someone's personal stuff. But I would say the best thing to do is start with who's your loan officer, or who's your company, your banking representative that you deal with all the time. And I think that would be the best way to start. And that's the kind of information I would go with. How long you've been in business. They usually don't even tell you sometimes balances, but I would just start with that.
Okay. And then the next question is, does 17XX surveys help? And then it says AA bus may help.
Yeah. Is that the IPC? I believe it's the IPC 1701. And yes and no. It's a lot of paperwork for a board house to fill out. And actually, it's a very good thing for a board house to fill out for their own personal to learn from. But I fill these out, and for lack of a better word, I mean, it's a snapshot. Board houses change. They have to be updated. So it does not hurt to ask for one, especially if you're a larger company. You get it's a way to get an idea, a good feel. I would suggest if your company requires 1701 and also require a visit, I'd pick up 1701 and I would read it, study it before I went to visit that vendor, and then go ahead and as you walk around, say, well, you mentioned you have this. I mean, it's a great. It goes in a lot of details. I mean, I think yes. The short answer is yes. It doesn't. If you really want to get into nuts and bolts, and especially with reliability and everything else, yes. The answer, short answer, it's a great thing. I would not poo-poo it at all, and especially depending on what your product goes into. If you're a contract manufacturer doing, $5 to $10 million a year, and most of your products commercial, then no. But if you're doing an OEM that is doing something that's more high reliability, yes. And and if you pick up a 1701, if a customer says, if a vendor, as you as a customer ask a vendor for a 1701, look at the date when it was written. If it's been updated once a year, or it's within a year, I think that's a very good sign they keep their act together. So short answer, yes. Long answer, a little bit of both, but definitely I think it's very helpful.
Great. Next question. If working direct with overseas factory, what type of roadblocks could you run into?
The biggest roadblock that I've heard is very good question. One of the things about working direct with offshore roadblock is depending how much you want to let them manage in a sense of freight. There's one thing about freight. I always say if you can negotiate a delivered price so they take care of everything it's to the door. One of the biggest things that people say is a roadblock, but it's really not really a roadblock, is the communication. They say, well, it's off hours. Well, when you're dealing with someone's a broker or domestic manufacturers dealing directly with offshore, I can't tell you how many times where people have called and the customer will hear, hey, yeah, okay, I'll find out about that and get back to you, because they got a call, because offshore in about an hour is, for most places, is asleep. So if you're willing to wait for that at 20%, you can do that yourself and save some money on it. The other roadblock is people are concerned about communication. Communication is best it's ever been between WeChat, between WhatsApp, email. I mean, years ago, I was dealing with, I had a $1,200, $1,400 phone bill because I was talking about offshore all the time. Today, it's a lot easier. Excuse me. But I think one of the roadblocks is that emails and communication with offshore, and this is all part of training, is how to talk with the offshore. Because a lot of times we'll send an email and say, hello, Jim, overseas. Yeah, I'm working on this big project and we're doing this, this, and this. Well, Jim, even though he has a very good command of the English language, is still interpreting every word you're sending over there. And while you think you're being nice and explaining everything, really it's not being rude. It's, hello, Jim, how are you? Item 1, do this. Item 2, I need this. Item 3, I need this. So there's ways to communicate effectively with him to get your answer in a timely manner. So sometimes they'll be going through all the stuff and they're trying to figure, well, what does Greg want over there? And it's not being rude. It's just that, don't take this wrong. Jim over there is dealing with other customers as well. So those are the biggest things I see is a block is the time zone. People think there's a block. People also think that there's a communication and just a little bit of training around that. And the third thing is this freight. People feel it's a bigger issue than it is, but it really isn't. Just know how to work around that.
Thanks. And then another question, how to compare a new supplier with the old one?
Okay. Well, the first thing before you go anywhere else, if you got a new supplier coming on board, that's a very good question, how to compare. It makes it easier to compare when you see that there's more out there. I'm jumping ahead of the question. It's like, again, you're dating, okay? You met one person and this other person's totally different. Oh my gosh. You're like, which is better, okay? But if you have a third person that you met and date, oh, okay, this is, I like 1 and 3. I like this. So what I'm trying to say is not to sound too crazy. I'm just saying the more visits, the more vendors you engage with, the easier it will be for you to distinguish what is better for your company. Now, with that being said, okay, you've already met others, you've seen others, you have an idea of what's going on. So the next thing is pricing. With all things being equal, quality, delivery, and service, we're going to assume that they're the same or at least the same, if not better than your last vendor. And then we're going to move on price. That's when you move. Is when everything's the same, you move on price. Otherwise, it's not worth it. So now you go ahead and say, okay, I'm getting it from my present vendor $1. I quoted for fun to see what happens with this other vendor, and their pricing is consistently lower. Okay, now I'm talking with them. I've checked out the references. I want to see what goes on with their operations. That's how I would start comparing first, is compare on price, compare on the size of the facility, check the references out, and then if you want, take a look at their facility, go visit, and that's either domestic or offshore. If you can afford that, if that makes sense for your company to spend that kind of money to save money. That's how I'd start with that right from there. It's just play the field, learn as much as you can, see what's out there, and go right for, as I said, not to say price is all that matters, but it's going to be worth it for you to make that move. You could also do what I call is, say you really like that vendor and came in aboard at 80 cents. Okay, call it a no-risk program. So say you buy 200 of boards every month from your present vendor and you're happy with it. So here we got December, say it's 2 months out. So you tell them, look, I'm going to give you a PO, a contingency PO. I'll give you a contingency PO for 600 pieces with delivery of 200 in December. But December is my qualification order. So what you do is you bring those 200 pieces in 1 month early. You tell them these are for December, but I want them November to check them out. Your November arrives same time your November delivery from your present vendor arrives normal time along with the 200 that comes in for the December delivery. Run the 200 from your present vendor along with 10, 25, or the other 200 from your new vendor, your hopeful. Run them down the line. And if all looks good, great. Put those on the shelf. Tell them your new vendor, you got the order, invoice me in December, and everything goes on well. If for some reason those 200 that were scheduled for December that you assembled in November and you found out they're not good, you let your new vendor know, get it resolved if you can, because maybe it's a simple thing. But if it's that bad, you have plenty of time to get the next 200 from your present vendor. You know, jumping to one vendor to the other vendor, I know can be scary. And sometimes it has to do with your end customer or PPAP approval, and it's really hard to do so. But a lot of customers can move. And some customers are worried about tooling. You can negotiate tooling and test charges, especially if you do a lot with them. So that's how I would compare. First, price, look at their equipment, what they may have, facility, customer references, and if everything looked good, then I give them that test order, contingency order that overlaps the present order that I have. And this way, if they do fall flat, my present vendor, who I'd like to have a better price from, who does okay, is there to keep me running in case there's a problem. And you could start off on, it doesn't have to be something that's, high visibility, but also you want to have something that gives a higher impact so you can bring somebody in to, so that production and management shows some sort of approval on this. Because that's your job, is to save them money and make their operation a hell of a lot more efficient than it is right now.
All right. Thank you, Greg. And it looks like that is all for the questions that were submitted.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Andrea and IPC. And again, you'll get the information and I'll let Andrea close it. So.
Thank you, Greg. And thanks for your time, and everybody else. Thank you for being here. And like Greg mentioned, I will send a post email after today in about 1 to 2 business days. So thanks, everyone.